Well, let's start with your conversations with the Energy Secretary and her upcoming visit to Oak Ridge.
A very constructive conversation yesterday with Secretary Granholm at the Department of Energy. I underscored for her the economic impact that Oak Ridge National Labs has in our region, the number of jobs supported, the economic impact, and the innovation that's occurring there. We talked about nuclear energy. We spent a good deal of time talking about supercomputing technology. We now have the second fastest supercomputer in the world, and we're getting ready to unveil the fastest supercomputer in the world this year. It's exciting.
It's big stuff. And your news release mentioned that you asked how the department plans to recreate innovation hubs like what we see in Oak Ridge to support economic development in underserved communities. So I guess my question to you is, what are you hoping for?
She's going to bring, and I invited her to bring her head of technology transfer with her to Oak Ridge. I'd like to have a fulsome discussion with her team about what we're doing in Oak Ridge right now, what can be done, not only in Tennessee, but can be used as a model across America, particularly when it comes to serving, rural, underserved markets that have been overlooked or have not had this sort of opportunity before. I think there's great potential here. I think Secretary Granholm is interested in that potential, and I'm delighted that she's going to accept the invitation that I extended on behalf of Senator Marsha Blackburn, Congressman Chuck Fleischman, and myself for her to come down. So she accepted my invitation. Again, she also accepted on behalf of her head of technology transfer. So I think that'll be the right team to come down and talk about economic development moving forward.
Okay, well, I'd like to move on to the For the People Act. I know you disagree with the naming of that legislation, but it was a proposal that would have made a lot of election changes on the federal level. But and I understand you're opposed to it, but help me understand why. Help me understand the vote to not even debate the bill.
Well, this bill is one of the largest power grabs that I've ever seen. It was repugnant to anybody that cares about federalism. It wants to come in and essentially federalize our elections. If you look no further than the bipartisan commission that former President Jimmy Carter, former Secretary of State James Baker led, they identified the most concerning areas of potential voter fraud. The top two: ballot harvesting and mail-in voting. This legislation sought to legislate both of those into law. It would forbid, voter identification, photo ID, forbid that. It would actually weaponize the Federal Election Commission. It would turn it from a bipartisan judiciary panel to adjudicate, claims and problems into a prosecutorial body that would be under the control of whoever has power in the White House. That's anathema to the way everything has operated in the past. It would fundamentally change voting. And I think the Democrats wanted to do this in a way that would give them an advantage, a way that would help them stay in power forever. There was no way this should even hit the floor of the United States Senate.
Well, and you are on record citing many of the issues you have with that legislation, but you're also on the record saying you support an audit. You support legislation to audit the 2020 election. I was curious as to why.
Well, because I think there were constitutional violations that took place in many states across the United States. There's a real concern about, on the part of the American people about the integrity of the 2020 election. We should audit it, find out if there were situations, which I believe there were, where the U.S. Constitution was violated. And in those cases, those states that violated the Constitution will not get any more federal funding for their elections until those constitutional violations are rectified.
Yeah, you believe a handful of states acted outside the Constitution when changes were made to the election. They cited the pandemic, but could you say right now whether you think any of those potential violations actually swung the election?
That's why I want an audit to dig into this. What I can say is this: the Constitution specifically allows for state legislators to set the rules of elections in their states. Yet what we had in multiple occasions was non-legislative actors who were stepping in, whether they be activist judges, election commissions, secretaries of state. They don't have the constitutional authority to set the rules, yet they came in and changed them in the middle of the game and in a way that I think may have affected the outcome of the election. That's why it's worthy of an audit, and that's why they should get no federal funding until those type of constitutional violations are rectified.
So it's not widespread fraud that you're concerned with. It is lawmakers acting outside of the Constitution.
I'm concerned about lawmakers operating outside of the Constitution, which may have precipitated fraud, which may have enabled it, which may have weakened the system in some way. That's why it should be rectified.
Well, I want to now turn to some recent news. It looks like a bipartisan group of senators have struck a deal on a framework for an infrastructure bill. It looks like the price tag on this one's 1.2 trillion. So with that news and based on that new price tag, is this something you can support?
Well, it's very early to say. I've not seen the actual legislative text of this. I've seen the same reports that you have. This is breaking news right now. But I want to see the actual details. As you know, the devil is always in the details. What we need to see is hard infrastructure, the things that most Tennesseans think about as infrastructure, which are roads, bridges, highways, waterways, airports, even broadband. We've seen other versions of this floated around that have things like free nanny care. I do not support and will not support that type of renaming of infrastructure to get this sort of social programs inserted. Also, it's going to be very important to find out how they intend to pay for it. I need to make certain that this doesn't result in some type of tax increase that, they've advertised that it won't do that, but I need to see the details to make certain that it doesn't impose tax increases or undo in any way the 2017 Tax Act that put our economy on a rate of growth that had not been seen for decades. In fact, the best economy that we have ever seen in our lifetimes was in place before the pandemic hit us. Let's not change those rules. I have no intention of doing that. I need to see the specifics of the package to tell you whether I can support it or not.
Well, and since we're talking about spending and money, I wanted to ask about your work to get more money to venues and theaters across the country. What news can you share on that? I believe it's the Shuttered Venue Operations Grant, and any idea how many people in Tennessee need that help?
This grant was passed before I arrived in the United States, and it was passed on a bipartisan basis. It was part of the Pandemic Relief Act that again, a number of bills were passed on a bipartisan basis in 2020, because at that point, the Congress and the United States Senate were focused on actually getting the economy repaired and back to work. What's happened, though, is that the SBA has taken far too long to implement the program. And if you think about Tennessee and our entertainment industry, I mean, we are an entertainment state. I was fortunate when I served as economic development chief of Tennessee to also be responsible for Tennessee's Film, Entertainment, and Music Commission. I have a deep appreciation for the contributions of the industry in our state, and I understand the fact that these industries have been really hurt hard by the pandemic. And for the SBA to take the time that they have to have a failed start, this is just unacceptable. That's why I had SBA Administrator Guzman on the phone yesterday. She has prioritized this. She's changed out the team. She's accelerating the processing right now. And she committed to me that they will have a substantial portion of these grants committed and addressed by the middle part of July.
Well, Senator, an issue we're seeing at the state and the federal level is the issue of critical race theory. And Leader McConnell has called it activist propaganda that seeks to divide us. So I was curious from you, I know you're on appropriations, so this may not have come up in committee, but where do you stand on the issue? Do you agree with the leader?
I'm not for anything that divides America. Right now, we're coming out of the worst recession that we've seen since the Great Depression. We're coming out of a pandemic that has hammered America. I mean, people have lost family members. People have lost loved ones. We need to be finding ways to come together as a nation, not finding ways to pull our nation apart. And I think it's critically important for us to be looking for ways to bridge divides rather than find ways that further divide us. So I'm very concerned about the agenda that is associated with this.
Well, and we heard Dr. Fauci speak about the Delta variant, I believe yesterday. He said it's the greatest threat to our nation's effort to eliminate COVID-19 or, COVID-19. I just checked, and it looks like 41% of Tennesseans have had at least one shot at this point. I'm just curious, do you have any message for those who still, are not comfortable getting the shot?
Well, each person's got to make their own decision, but I'll just state this, that I have taken the vaccine. I've had both shots, as has my wife. I've certainly looked at it and felt that that was the appropriate step for me to take. And I would encourage those who are, concerned to study the matter carefully, but it's certainly a decision that I've taken in the affirmative.
Well, and I'm running out of time here, but I want to talk about the Migrant Resettlement Transparency Act. I looked into numbers because we've seen some planes landing in East Tennessee late at night, believed to be carrying migrant children. And I looked, the numbers show unaccompanied minors were actually being released in higher numbers under the Trump administration. But there is a lot of outrage right now, including by you. Is it a transparency issue? I mean, I guess I'm wondering, has this issue always been there, or is it because it's the Biden White House sending the kids to Tennessee?
The core issue is that the Biden administration has caused our border to collapse. We've got an unprecedented number of people charging our border right now. We have illicit drugs coming across our border at record pace. If you talk with sheriffs across Tennessee, they'll tell you methamphetamine use, fentanyl use is up. Overdoses are up, and deaths from fentanyl at record levels. We've got lawlessness at our border right now. And the discussion about root causes, I went to Guatemala fully a month before Vice President Harris did. I went to Mexico a month before Vice President Harris did. I met with the Guatemalan president. You know what he articulated to me? The greatest root cause are the messages coming out of the Biden White House. Messages that suggest that we'll get families together. That message was immediately taken by the coyotes and used to market to vulnerable families in Guatemala and recruit children to undertake a very dangerous journey, to suggest that those families should give their life savings to these coyotes just so their loved ones can risk their lives. And more than 50% of the people that engage in these journeys become victims of crime themselves, whether they're involved in drug trafficking, human trafficking, or worse. This is a critical crisis, and a crisis that's been induced by Biden administration policies. You look at what was happening in December of 2020, we had dramatically reduced the illegal crossings. That's because of the migrant protection protocols that had been put in place and were hard negotiated by the Trump administration. Those were torn up the minute that Joe Biden came into office, and the flood of illegal immigration has just continued to escalate.
What do you make of the vice president announcing a visit to the border?
Well, I think it's a little bit late that she should do this. She supposedly is in charge of this, and she obviously is not prioritizing this in any manner. I think what the Biden administration is doing, in fact, is trying to facilitate this. They're trying to get rid of the photo opportunity at the border by building up processing capacity. They want to process more immigrants. That's their approach. They might as well put a turnstile at the United States border with Mexico, because they are increasing the flow of traffic. Again, record numbers coming across our border illegally. And again, the lack of seriousness, the lack of gravity that they're undertaking, well, they're turning a blind eye to fentanyl deaths in our state of Tennessee. I mean, talk with sheriffs, they'll tell you the use of Narcan's up. I mean, this is a huge concern. And for the Biden administration to just point a blind eye, they're so tone deaf. It really is incredibly unfortunate. The people of Tennessee do not want this.
Well, I have one final question, if there's time here, and it's a topic of violence. I was reading an article this morning that experts are expecting an uptick in gun violence this summer, and the president announced measures to target law-breaking gun dealers, provide federal resources to police departments, and allow some communities to use leftover COVID dollars to fight the problem. Is that the right approach? And do you think there is a solution to rising gun violence?
Look, the approach isn't to prosecute law-abiding citizens who are exercising their Second Amendment right. The approach should be to stop all of this conversation about defunding the police. We should be supporting the men and women who are police officers and law enforcement every day. When I talk with sheriffs, when I talk with police chiefs, they tell me how difficult it is to recruit right now. We've got retirements across the nation in law enforcement at record numbers. This has been debilitating. The messaging that's coming from the far left of the Democrat Party has been so demoralizing to law enforcement officers across the nation, and that is true also in Tennessee. We need to be sending a very clear message that we support law enforcement. It's about time the Biden administration is looking at more properly resourcing law enforcement again, and once and for all, end this discussion about defunding the police.